As the state's leading property and casualty insurance trade association, the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance plays a crucial role in safeguarding Wisconsinites. Alliance members provide vital insurance coverage, ensuring financial protection for individuals, businesses, and communities across the state. In times of need, they act as a reliable resource, helping residents recover from unforeseen events. Ultimately, the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance and its members contribute to the resilience and well-being of Wisconsin families and businesses by offering essential protection and support. WisI video of the WisPolitics Madison Luncheon Series at the Madison Club is made possible with sponsorship support from the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance.
Hello everybody. We're going to get started. Hi, I'm Jeff Maris from WisPolitics.com. Welcome to the June 5th edition of the WisPolitics Luncheon at the Madison Club. First off, I want to thank our sponsors because literally we could not do without them. WC Energy Group, Walmart, ARP Wisconsin. Thank you, Martha. Martha, wave. Martha will be retiring this year. So let's hear it for Martha. AmFam Insurance, Hush Blackwell Strategies, HB Strategies. They've been with us from the beginning under various names, but thank you very much, Rob and company. Thanks for being here, and thanks for sponsoring. And yes, let's hear it. And last but not least, XL Energy. So also want to give a plug for our printed directory. It's our only printed product, so it's like a collector's item, so you should make sure you grab as many as you can. Anyway, they're available at the registration desk. And for those of us who still like to look at the printed document, this is a good one to have. Upcoming events, June 24th, we have an event right here. The next one is with the Democratic Attorney General, Josh Kaul, who really hasn't had anything to do in the first months of the Trump administration. You know. So I don't know what the heck we're going to talk about, but we'll find something. Okay, today's program, I want to alert you to something. That's not Brian Schimming. Okay, Brian. Okay. No, we send. Brian is sick. I mean, I had I think the cough and cold, or maybe it's /COVID that he has right now, and I'm glad he's not here spreading any germs. But he did tell me that despite what RFK Jr. says, you should get your shots. That's not what he said. That's a joke. He's going to be mad at me now. He'll never do another event. He'll always send Amy now. Okay, so all right. Well, let's hear it for Amy Loudenbeck, and then I'll tell you about Amy. If you don't know about Amy, Amy is a former state representative. Then she ran for Secretary of State. She is very involved in Republican politics. She is part of the Post-Election Commission, which is charged by the GOP chair to get at why the state GOP has faltered in many statewide elections over the past few years. So it's a very important thing, and we'll get into that. She was also involved with the Kinzer campaign for state superintendent. So and she now lives in Walworth County. So thank you, Amy, for filling in for Brian, and really appreciate it. Okay, then we have Ben Wikler. Ben has always been very good about coming to our events, and whether he's countering the various Republican state chairs over the years, or just being a solo guest. Ben's been the chair since 2019, and here in Wisconsin. He came from MoveOn.org. And he's leaving his post. There's going to be an election at the state convention coming up later this month. And what's next for Ben? I think we'll get at that a little bit later. But thank you very much. Let's hear it for Ben Wikler. Okay, the format is I ask some questions and then we get some questions from all of you. So let's just start. Amy, I want to ask you and Ben the same question to get us going. So the Republicans had their convention last month in Rothschild in the Wausau area, and then the Democratic Party is having theirs June 14, 15 in the Wisconsin Dells. Amy, what's the state of the state Republican Party these days?
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. Convention was in the Wausau area, well attended. It's a non-election cycle, so typically that's a little bit of a lower attendance. Certainly having a big election for your chair might be a different turnout, but training and updates, and certainly a lot of interacting with fellow Republicans and awarding counties that did really, really excellent work in the November election. And I think that was a big takeaway. Certainly April was almost like a mini midterm. Things didn't go our way, but November and giving our Wisconsin electoral votes for President Trump is something that was historic, and it was part of a lot of good work done by a lot of grassroots activists across the state, and so there was a lot to celebrate as well. So I think there was still a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm, and it's an opportunity for people from around the state to kind of share what their parties are working on, and I think some of the ideas that are important to them. It's an important part of being a grassroots membership organization, and I'd say the state of the party is strong. It ended well. Governor Thompson and Chairman Schimming really got the crowd going, and I think we ended on a really high note, and we're just back doing the work on the commission and some other things, getting ready for what's next.
Okay, we'll get into the commission and the spring election in a bit. Okay, Ben Wikler, your convention's coming up, and you're yielding the chair post to somebody else. So what's the state of the party now, and what do you see the future?
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks, everybody here. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to my mom, who's joining for my final WisPolitics lunch as chair.
It won't be your final WisPolitics lunch.
As chair.
Oh, as chair.
Yeah. But thank you in advance. And I'm proud to say that I'll be passing the torch at the state party with a state party that is in phenomenal shape. It is in, I would argue, the strongest shape of any state party in the country at this moment. And I say that because of a lot of data and a lot of intangibles that we can see and feel. It starts with our members. It starts with party members. You know, this is a grassroots organization, a membership organization. The level of commitment that we've seen has floored me. In the spring Supreme Court election, our volunteers knocked on more doors and called more voters than they did in the midterms of 2022. We finished more than 10,000 volunteer shifts across the state. We had 200,000 people donate to the party or to Susan Crawford's campaign for Supreme Court. We were able to raise and help support Susan Crawford in a way that allowed her to go toe-to-toe with the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, who poured at least $25 million into the state Supreme Court election. And none of this was guaranteed. After last fall, it is very hard and very painful to lose a presidential race. When we look at the data, we could see that Wisconsin, for the first time in a long time, was more Democratic than the national popular vote in 2024. We were the closest state in the country. We had the smallest swing towards Trump of any battleground state. And that's because while Republican turnout went up everywhere, Wisconsin was one of the few states where Democratic turnout went up as well. And those voters, because we run a coordinated campaign operation that works at every level of the ballot, those voters voted for Tammy Baldwin too, whereas 54,000 Republicans didn't vote in the Senate race. And so Hovde lost at the same time as Trump won because with the same number of Democratic votes because so many Republican voters dropped off. But it still was intensely painful to lose. And a lot of people across the country on the Democratic side felt like the floor was disappearing under them and wanted to withdraw from politics and disengage, and it all felt like too much, and they wondered if their work had made any difference at all, the millions of doors that we knocked on last year. But people came right back. And this spring, so many people, Claudia Pogreba is here, who runs a neighborhood team that's one of our mightiest volunteer action teams here in the state of Wisconsin. Her team members came back. People knocked on doors all over the state. They did everything in their power. And in this spring's election, we had a blowout win where Susan Crawford got more votes for Supreme Court, not only than any other Supreme Court candidate in Wisconsin history, but more than any Republican candidate for governor has received in a November election in the state of Wisconsin. And that translated down ballot as well to school boards and city councils and common councils and village boards, the superintendent race, and so many other races. What we see right now in Wisconsin, I think, is a burgeoning blue wave that's going to hit the state in 2026 with full force. And our state Democratic Party is closely working with our allies and partners, with unions and grassroots organizations, with the candidate campaigns, is in phenomenal shape to help accelerate that wave and win a trifecta in 2026.
Okay, so while we're on the talking about the party, so there's a race for party chair, and you actually endorsed somebody in that race. And I think you had said you were not going to endorse, but then you endorsed Devin Remiker, who had worked for you, essentially, right? So why did you endorse him?
So when I ran for DNC chair, which I launched my campaign last December 1st, folks started coming to me and saying they were thinking about running for state chair if I won, and then the spot was open and there was an election. And especially given that I might become the DNC chair, I was like, I'm going to stay neutral. I don't want to get involved. And I kind of stuck with that for a while. That race didn't work out. Came back. We had the Supreme Court race. I thought about it a lot and decided not to run for another term. And then once the field was firm, and there's 3 candidates, all friends of mine, running for state party chair now, I just reflected that I knew, because I'd worked so closely with him, that Devin Remiker would be an extraordinary chair of the state party. Devin was the person who this spring mapped out, was the architect of the People versus Musk campaign, the plan to go directly at Musk in the Supreme Court race, which in partnership with Susan Crawford's extraordinary campaign and our allies helped to make this election not just a question of Schimmel versus Crawford, but also Crawford versus Elon Musk and everything Musk was doing. Devin organized the campaign and wrote the whole battle plan for the fight to prevent the impeachment of Janet Protasewicz in 2023. He's just a brilliant strategist and a superb leader for the state party who's been very behind the scenes. So my decision to endorse was, I thought he'd do a phenomenal job, and I also knew that he's been working behind the scenes, and people would not know what a role he's played in so many of our fights unless I said something. And just him saying it, I was the chair, people would think that he was taking credit for my work, which didn't feel fair. So I wanted to lay out what I'd seen and experienced about his leadership and feel really excited about his opportunity to win the election on June 15th.
Okay, so are you making calls for him?
I'm making calls for him.
Okay. All right, so Amy, you heard Ben talk about the state Supreme Court race, and so I guess looking back on the spring election, you were involved with the Kinzer campaign. Well, what happened? What went wrong, do you think, that the margin, there was more, the money balance, there was a balance there in terms of money. The Republican side did have equal footing on money, and then, and many would say you had a better Supreme Court candidate than you did before, yet the margin was just about the same. So what happened in the spring elections?
Well, the data and the information that Ben shared is accurate. I mean, you had historic turnout, historic investment, first race with 50% turnout, higher than 50% turnout in a spring election in Wisconsin, including when there was a presidential primary. So extraordinary turnout, extraordinary amount of dollars spent. Your peer, your colleague, Devin, I think you're right. I mean, he turned it into a mandate. He turned it into a decision, the people versus Musk. And so when you talk about things that, as a former candidate and elected official and campaign manager, I look for candidates who are great candidates. I look for candidates that have great ideas. I look for candidates that are willing to do the work and willing to go out and make their case to voters, look them in the eye, shake their hand, and ask for their vote. And that's what I did for Brittany Kinzer. And her opponent ran a basement campaign and relied on the anger of the Wisconsin people and a mandate on Elon Musk, someone who she's literally never met. And so you talk about a little bit of, collateral damage, if you will, because she did overperform Brad Schimmel. But I think when you look at a candidate like Schimmel or an organization like RPW that is saying, we had this momentum going into November. We know that Republicans traditionally don't turn out as strongly in a spring election as the Democrats do. But in this case, you definitely were able to capture that anger, to put it into a message that was really on level with what people were not only just seeing on the ground in Wisconsin, but also overlapping with the first 100 days of the Trump campaign. I think that mix of that dynamic would have made it difficult for any candidate, regardless of their quality or their credentials, to come through on the other side, given the landscape and the political climate. And so, with that in mind, we, the Republican Party, we're gonna, of course, do our own postmortem and think about what we can do differently. But we also, I think, need to recognize that there are some things that happen. I mean, campaigns don't occur in isolation. I mean, every campaign, whether it was one that I ran or that I helped run, you look at how much what's happening on the outside impacts it, and when you have races that are on the margins, you can think, well, if this was different or that was different. But when I look back at the Kinzer campaign or even at the Schimmel campaign, you can't take one thing out, like, oh, if we had more money, or oh, if we had more time, or oh, if there wasn't this, $1 million negative ad that ran against me. Would that have changed the result? I don't know, because there was just so much. I mean, I can tell you, when I'm up in Eagle River and people are protesting in March, and they are people from Eagle River. They're not bussed in from Madison. I mean, there were people all over. I spoke for Brittany at a couple of events, but seeing people that were really, really angry and agitated and engaged in all corners of the state, not just here in Madison. I think that was sort of an indicator that there was definitely something going on within the grassroots that we'd not seen before.
Okay, let's stick with you also on. So this post-election commission that you're a part of, that's an internal Republican Party effort to diagnose problems in statewide elections, even though Trump won in November. So tell me what the work of that commission is doing. What's the timeline? What do you hope to achieve?
Sure, I'll take the timeline first. Initially, we had talked about trying to be done by the end of June, and given the inventory we needed to do to kind of just come up with findings and get the information that we needed, July is what our the end of July is our goal. We're hoping sooner. And so we meet weekly, and we've split into...
The chairman is not part of it.
The chairman, Chairman Schimming, is not a part of the commission. The commission is being led by State Treasurer John Leiber, and there are a handful of county chairs on it. I'm there as a former state rep. Obviously, I have the insight of working on the Kinzer campaign, but also just someone who also ran statewide and some other... I think involvement in my own county parties and in other things. So there's a lot of really good people there that I think want to get more information and not just take what we're hearing from other people or the narratives that we're hearing. So first, check your assumptions, right? So if the assumption is that people weren't doing what they were supposed to, or we didn't have enough money, like let's figure out the facts first, and then talk about what we can do differently and better. And I think the probably most active component is going on is discussion around the county parties. So we're talking about RPW as an organization, the county parties, and the candidates, and how they all interface and how we can improve working together. So messaging, activating folks to get out the vote, getting volunteers engaged, all the things, right? And so if those things aren't dialed in, and you know how hard this is, and you're a member organization, so you want groups to have autonomy, but things like best practices or coaching or training, because we have a lot of people who are younger coming up in the party, we have technology, we have so many, I mean, this is not like you start doing this and you stop doing this, everything is additive. There is so much out there, and so are we all using the same tools? Are they integrated? So asking really kind of the mechanics and questions like that, looking at org charts, looking at goals and fundraising and trends and things like that. So The county party group, they did a survey of all the county parties. I think the last check we had participation from at least 50. So the chairs and the vice chairs are responding. Sometimes they both are. And we're also looking at member input as well, but trying to go through and talk about money, organization, and messaging and how it applies to each of those categories and what we can do better. So it's not really an autopsy, it's more of findings and recommendations where what can we do better? And sometimes we're comparing ourselves to, we're kind of comparing ourselves to the expectations of others, if that makes sense. And, so we want to set expectations for ourselves and others high, but we know we also are relying on grassroots. And, one question that came up, we don't know what the Democratic Party of Wisconsin's org chart looks like. We don't know how many comms people you have. We might know how much money you raise and where it comes from, but again, at the end of the day, you win or lose an election and you put a little tally in that card, but when you're comparing yourself to basically this panel of folks that we're all trying to we're also all trying to kind of take out our own assumptions and bias out of it, and so we can really just look at what can we do better. I used to work at a chamber, so a member organization. I worked at School Choice Wisconsin, also a member organization. So you have boards, you have all these other things that are happening, but at the end of the day, your members are able to execute and elect their own leadership and do their own thing. So it's been really interesting, and I think that some of the findings will give strength to maybe things the executive board or the staff have thought about, and also things that the county has. But it's not going to be pointing to one thing outside of these external factors that I brought up, but we can always do better. And when you're looking at elections that have been won by relatively small margins, particularly in the fall, and knowing we're going into November, knowing we have, the entire assembly up for re-election, half the Senate up for re-election, all of our congressional seats, we want to make sure that all cylinders are firing.
Okay, so Ben, you should just help out Amy with all the things that she doesn't know about the party. I don't know why you're holding back. Anyway, so all right. So the National Dem Party is going through an extreme self-examination after Trump's victory. And yes, it was narrow here, but Trump won. Okay. So when you look back, what lessons did you learn? Yeah, the bounce back in the state Supreme Court race was great. But what lessons did you learn from November?
There are so many lessons from November. The first
give me
is,
give me something to the top.
The first is it takes time to build trust with voters. It was very hard to go 107 days with a candidate that people really didn't know. There was a huge number of people who only had the very slimmest impressions of who Kamala Harris was. And when there's a race like that, and Republicans have had this challenge with contested primaries, where then there's a short period after the primary is over when suddenly they have a nominee, and we've tried to make it our job to make sure Wisconsin voters know that nominee. But that was very much the Trump campaign's approach, was to try to define who Kamala Harris was. Something that Biden had a number of challenges, but he was known to the electorate, and Donald Trump is known to the electorate. And for both of them, you could run a lot of ads, and it would not change people's impression of them at all. But when you have a new nominee at the last second, ads can make a huge difference. People's perceptions of who a candidate is can change dramatically. So that was one big central thing. I think the second thing is that it's now very clear that the polls were correct, that the biggest issue that people were furious about was prices. The economic issue, fundamentally about the cost of living, was the thing that came up over and over and over and over in polls. And after the election, some political scientists that do comparative politics pointed out that 2024 is the only year in memory where every incumbent party in the world lost ground, left, right, and center. And the reason is we had global inflation. Every single country had higher prices for everything. And if I could wave a magic wand, I think the Harris campaign, which was careful not to break with the Biden administration, I wish there had been a clear contrast on this issue of prices and a really laser-focused message of this is why prices are high and here's how we're going to drive them down. I think building trust on that and giving people a sense that if they wanted change, they should vote for Kamala Harris as a change candidate was probably the best thing that you could say as the Democratic nominee in that moment. And I think Trump ran very aggressively with an economic message about bringing costs down that resonated with a lot of people. There are a million postmortems about all these different message decisions and all these different choices. What's so striking is that the people who shifted the most, either from Biden to Trump or from Biden to the couch, people who had voted Democratic and then didn't after that, they're overwhelmingly folks who said they were highly affected by prices. It was more working class folks and poor folks. It was the first election in my lifetime where Democrats lost the majority of voters earning less than $50,000 a year. And the same group of voters reported that they weren't watching TV news. They were much less likely, overwhelmingly, very few of them read a newspaper. Only a very small number subscribed to WisPolitics, unfortunately. and
okay, so we both have a lot of work to do.
We both have a lot of work to do. And that means that if you want to reach those voters and communicate with them about the issues affecting their lives, you've got to find a whole bunch of different new ways to communicate outside of regular media where people get news and information. I think that what Trump did with the McDonald's event and with the garbage truck, those both were visual communication that said to people, I see working people, I see what's happening in your life. And there was finding a lot of ways to get outside the box and communicate with folks that you are tuned to the economic pain that they feel across generation, race, ethnicity, geography. This was a nationwide swing. It's the only election, I think, in the last 50 years where Democrats lost ground in every single state. And this happens when there's something that pretty much everyone's frustrated about. I think the economics and what happened with prices is the number one thing. And I think having a campaign that afterwards you're like, what was that campaign about? Oh, yeah, she was mad about high prices. I don't feel like we hit that mark, and I think that's the thing that would have gotten us to where we needed to be.
Okay, so in retrospect, Ben, would it have been better for the Democrats to have a primary after Biden stepped out when he did? A mini primary? I think Nancy Pelosi, a former state chair, and somebody who spoke at to the Wisconsin delegation at the National Convention had that point of view, didn't she?
I'm now reading the same post-mortem books that everyone is and everyone's analyses. So we had a process to choose a nominee. It was that the delegates to get to vote, and I was the chair of the Wisconsin delegation. The day that Biden stepped away, we had a Zoom call with the whole delegation, just checking on where people were. And person after person was like, "I'm for Harris. I'm for Harris." She'd been to Wisconsin multiple times that year already. I think there was a hyper-compressed primary, the shortest primary in American history, where all the other candidates endorsed her and all the delegates went for her, and she had it. Now, obviously, when you get to the end and you lose the election, that means that you probably wouldn't want to repeat things that happened. And if you look back, there's a whole bunch of different ways, different roads that might have led to a different destination. I do think the virtue of primaries is that they make the nominee stronger because they give the nominee a chance to introduce and define themselves. And so having it happen that quickly meant that there was no period where a whole bunch of people were hearing her message and thinking about, is she the person I want? It just kind of happened. And in the period after that, a lot of people were like, wait, how did that happen? And it was following the rules that the DNC adopts, that the RNC has its own rules. Delegates are chosen in advance, and then they make the decision about who the nominee is. But just more time for voters to get comfortable with who Kamala Harris was and hear her story. I don't know how many Wisconsinites know that she lived in Wisconsin when she was a kid for a couple of years. Right. I wish everyone knew that, because I think that would help. But that's the kind of thing it's hard to get out when you only have a tiny number of days till the election.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the future, because, it's been a very newsy opening to the Trump term, and now there's a big reconciliation bill that's in the Senate, and then people are already, talking about 2026. We already have our lineup set for the 2026 Supreme Court race. So I think Tommy Thompson said a lot of times that elections are won in the year before the election, not in election year. Yeah, I think there's something to that. So, Amy, what do you think of the climate now and how it will affect the races in 2026? The political landscape now and how it will affect what happens in 2026.
Great question, and
that's what I pride myself on.
So right, so it's June, and I think for activists and people in the bubble, it's holy Moses, it's 10 months away and we're going to have another Supreme Court race, or however long until we have a primary if we need to, or local elections. But there is a tremendous amount of election fatigue out there. Election fatigue, donor fatigue. Even legislators, they're going to go home and they're going to be in their districts and doing all of the constituent relations things. So for incumbents, yes, this is a time. I mean, if you're an incumbent, this is a time that you're, I think, reestablishing and cementing your opportunity to be that, to have the opportunity to run again and be successful, whether it's in a primary or in a general election. But for an open, for a seat like a Supreme Court seat that is statewide, certainly Justice Bradley is not going to be able to do the grassroots type of a campaign that a legislative candidate would, for example. But it is a statewide race, and so probably right now they're getting organized. They are raising their funds. Again, there's a little bit of election and voter fatigue, but I don't think that the Republican Party of Wisconsin or the Democratic Party of Wisconsin would be wise to say, oh, we have plenty of time to worry about that, because indeed we don't. I served with Chris Taylor in the legislature. She's extremely sharp. She's going to have a voting record to defend, and also a case to make to the voters, and certainly Justice Bradley does as well. She's the incumbent, so that's historically been advantageous, and it'll be interesting to see how someone who is really, I mean, I know with the Crawford campaign, there were ads to connect her to her roots in Chippewa Falls and try to give her a little bit more of outstate appeal. I think that might be a little bit harder to do with someone like Judge Taylor. But at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting if this Supreme Court race ends up being a mandate on something else besides candidates and their records and things like that. It'll be anyone's. I think the strategy, that's something that we're in a little bit of unknown territory, if you will, because the Supreme Court races have gotten more and more expensive, and people are talking more about issues and not necessarily following the rule of law and some of those other things. So I personally think that this is a time for candidates in other statewide offices who want to run. If that's the case, they should be out there talking to voters now, announcing they're forming exploratory committees. I think giving themselves a little bit of a longer runway. I can share from running before statewide myself, when we had a lot of candidates that were jumping in, just even leading up to our state convention in 2022, that it's really, the shorter the runway, the harder it is for the campaign and the harder it is for the grassroots. So I think that the advantage with the Supreme Court is that the stage is set, but it'll be interesting to see how long it takes for the field of statewide candidates to coalesce so that people can start getting organized and deciding who they're going to support.
Okay, so you already have Josh Schoeman, the Washington County executive, declaring he's running for governor. You have Bill Berrien, a businessman and former Navy SEAL from southeastern Wisconsin, forming a PAC that looks like a prelude to a campaign. You have Tom Tiffany considering it. You have three Dems are lined up to take on Derek Van Orden in western Wisconsin. You have Randy Bryce trying to make a comeback, against the style. So, I mean, I think a lot of activity is even more advanced than, usual. Ben, to what do you owe that? And how are you looking at what's going on now as a prelude to 2026?
I agree with Amy. I think 2026 really does get shaped by what happens right now, and it'll be shaped by what happens across the country next year. when you look at this spring Supreme Court race, it was very explicit. Brad Schimming said last year that he wanted to nationalize the race. He was explicit that his goal was to get 60% of the Trump voters to turn out in his election. And to his credit and the GOP's credit, they exceeded that goal. It was 62% of Trump voters who turned out in the spring Supreme Court election. That would have been enough to defeat any previous Supreme Court election candidate on either side. It just wasn't enough to defeat Susan Crawford, who got 78% of Harris's turnout. I think that next year there will be these national kind of winds blowing through our state. What's happening right now with this attempt to massively cut Medicaid, throw tens of thousands of Wisconsinites off of Medicaid in order to fund a tax cut for the wealthiest Americans, it's incredibly unpopular in polling. It is something that is going to be a major topic and theme in 2026. This might be the biggest legislative vote that is taken in this 2-year period. And so the events that happen right now are absolutely going to shape next year. And for candidates and campaigns and parties, the work right now sets the stage for what happens next year. We're going out and talking to voters, especially folks who we think maybe didn't vote for Harris last year, but did vote for Susan Crawford this spring, and trying to build relationships with them because they could be the margin of victory in statewide races in 2026. And if you look at, we've had on both sides contested primaries, for different races. A lot of people announced quite early, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a big Republican primary. I'm not sure I would bet on any of these Republican candidates for governor having a banner year in 2026, in part because I think we have a great governor, we have a great track record here, and because the whole national environment feels like one where people who are concerned about the fate of American democracy, concerned about the economy being spun into freefall, are going to be furious and voting for a check on the Trump administration. And that creates a condition where it's pretty hard to overcome those headwinds for the GOP. It's also why recruiting for us, for state legislature and for other offices, is going extremely well.
Okay, Amy, I'm going to pepper him with some questions first. Okay, so is Evers running again?
I hope he runs again. I think he's been a tremendous governor. He's given voters a lot of reasons to vote for him for a third term. What you see in his budget right now, what he's proposed and negotiating for support for K-12 public education, for the university system to prevent system school layoffs and closures, the work to make sure that we have childcare in this state to help working families be able to get ahead and know that our kids are going to do great. Those things are extremely popular with Wisconsinites. And at the same time, he's fighting back against the excesses of the Trump administration in a way that I think is winning him a lot of friends across the state. He's said publicly he's thinking it through. He's going to make a decision probably in the next few months. So I'm cheering for him. I'm excited about the state party convention where the theme is the road to 2026. And the governor fixed the roads. He's just been on a pothole tour across the state filling potholes. So I think if he does keep his car on the road,
I wish he'd come to my street. But anyway, I'll have to talk to him about that. Okay. So all right. So if he doesn't run, are you going to run?
I have no news to share. I'm focused on making sure we're ready to support him into a third term and to win a Democratic Assembly majority and a Senate majority and the Supreme Court seat next spring and all the other statewide offices. We are hopefully going to flip the state treasurer's office this time. So with apologies.
Well, that's a warning. Go and tell Leiber that. Okay. So what about the 3 Dems in the Van Orden seat running for a primary? Does that surprise you? Because Rebecca Cook is... she was this is her third straight run at the seat.
I think one reason why people jump into a race like that is because Derek Van Orden is incredibly vulnerable. He's identified nationally as one of the most vulnerable Republican incumbents in the nation. He underperformed the top of the ticket by about 5 points. He won by less than 3 percentage points. And anyone who doesn't think there is likely to be at least a 3-point swing in the Democrats' direction in 26 relative to 24 has not looked at a lot of historical political data.
So you think you get Van Orden even if they don't redraw the maps?
I think Derek Van Orden is in his final term in Congress, and he has to decide whether he wants to use that term to take away health care from his own constituents in order to enrich the already wealthy.
Okay, so is Iron Stash really the guy to beat Style?
We are neutral in primaries at the Democratic Party of Wisconsin.
Would you encourage there to be a primary?
I would encourage the members of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin to abide by our Constitution. We really believe deeply that this is up to voters to decide who to support in a primary contest. And that's a seat that I want to flip as well. I actually think that could be in reach in 2026 on the current maps. It's on the DCCC's red to blue list. And if you look at 2010, for example, if we have a swing like that, this is a year when that seat could very easily flip, and we could have a 4-4 delegation to match our 50-50 electorate.
Okay, but you would like the maps to get even better, I bet.
Well, these maps have the...
These are Tony Evers' maps, under a certain, restrictions, I guess.
So the old Supreme Court majority invented this idea that the maps adopted in 2022 should be the ones that changed the least from those adopted in the 2011 redistricting. And those maps were drawn by a Republican trifecta and were drawn with a bunch of very specific electoral outcomes in mind. The least changes doctrine has no basis in law, no basis in our Constitution, has been thrown out when it comes to our state legislative maps. And I don't really see a leg that these congressional maps have to stand on. So there's a challenge before our state Supreme Court to our congressional maps. I have every confidence that the Supreme Court will really carefully examine our Constitution and our statutes and figure out how to rule. But my goal at the Democratic Party is to make sure that we're supporting folks who want to run, building grassroots infrastructure on the ground, and communicating very clearly that Brian Style, like Derek Van Orden, right now has already cast a vote that will rob tens of thousands of Wisconsinites of their health insurance coverage, cost our state a huge amount of money, and essentially take money away from those who need it the most, hardworking folks who do not have every advantage in life, and hand it to people for whom life has been very generous. And I don't think those are Wisconsin values, and I don't think that's what Wisconsin voters are looking for in 2026.
Okay, Amy, I'm sorry I had to, go down that path. But anyway, you have a lot to react to there, and I can pick off some of the predictions. But let's just start with the Van Orden and Style. I mean, you're in Styles district. So under the, unless the lines are changed, do you think Brian Style's in trouble?
I think Brian Style is a very effective and well-liked congressman from the Janesville area, leading all the way over into southeast Wisconsin. He did well against Peter Barca last session. He's done well. He's performed strongly in every election, and I think if the maps change, certainly that makes it a little bit more difficult, but he's got cross appeal. He's very pleasant, agreeable, authentic. I think that you can talk about the ads and the things that are gonna come up. I think that some of the tactics that are going on now with these town halls, with Mark Pocan going up into Derek Van Orden's district, and some of these things, I mean, if Wisconsinites want leadership, if people in Wisconsin want to actually vote for someone because of who they are and what they stand for, and not the things that they hear about on the TV news at commercial time, or what Mark Pocan has to say about what's happening up in western Wisconsin. I mean, that at the end of the day, I'm going to recap because that was a run-on sentence. But at the end of the day, when, people are going to tune out. I am already tuning out. We've got Randy Bryce with the press releases, with the town halls and things like that. People, we need leaders. I think that there's a lot of apathy as far as election goes, and fear, sure, is a good tool to drive turnout. But I think that when people do an honest day's work, and you're known in your district as someone that can be trusted to listen to you, or to help you with your constituent work, or to be truthful when you're speaking to them, or caring about the things that keep them up at night. Those are qualities that both Congressman Van Orden and Congressman Style have. And so if people can be grounded in that and not just this hyperbole, then we have a shot at keeping good people in office.
How are you feeling about the governor's race next year?
Well, it's difficult with only one statewide constitutional office in Republican hands. It becomes the legislature's job. Certainly, I served in the legislature. The legislature makes the laws. And so we're kind of, the best offense is a good defense. And I think the legislature has been really strong at playing defense on some of the things that just are unable to be supported and sustainable in the budget, but at the same time being leaders and trying to work with Governor Evers on certain things with more meetings in person. Those kinds of things, I think doing that now and getting the budget out of the way, it's going to be, then the rest of it is going to be kind of some pre-election things. But if there's another session with a lot of vetoes, I don't know what Governor Evers runs on. And so for those reasons, I think that there is a bit of a leadership void on the governor's for a governor's race. Again, if people want to vote on something that would matter to them, someone that's going to actually bring across bring crossover appeal, because so much of this is just people in the left and the right corners. We need a candidate who can actually bring people together and be genuine in their willingness to at least listen.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to questions from the audience here. A little late in getting there, but we were covering a lot of territory. And I want to give a shout out and reminder that Wisconsin Eye tapes our luncheons, and you can view them later at Wisconsin Eye, and that the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance is the sponsor of those videos. Okay, well, how about some questions? No, I'm sorry, the press gets to ask after, so not now. Okay, go ahead. Well, there's still a chance. You can still go to sign up, I'm sure. Okay, well, let's go to, let me rephrase it a little bit just for the camera. So I think the question is, can the parties play a role in encouraging bipartisan problem solving? So Amy, you were, a state rep, and, now you're involved maybe more at the, at the party level. What's your take on that idea?
I'm happy to answer that. And thanks for the question. And I do want to kind of back up the last couple of answers. I've been a little more unscripted in answering for myself, not necessarily what I think Brian Schimming would say when he was sitting here, or the Republican Party of Wisconsin. But I do think at the end of the day, part of the job of the parties is to kind of share what we're about, so more people hear that from their friends and neighbors, for example, because there is a contrast, and I'm gonna and this isn't to be judgmental, but I mean, if I would say we're for limited government and you're for big government, but and if I had you say, I'm not going to go there, but to show people a little bit of the contrast, but also to let people, I think, and I know there are people here from Dane County and Sauk County that are Republicans, or people that are in Walworth County or Rock County, where I live, that are Democrats. So certainly for RPW and for the candidates that run under the Republican banner, I think that it should be encouraged that the willingness to talk to the other side, to give people a little bit of grace, should be, this is, again, me personally, but it should be applauded. And I think that Ben and I are going to walk away from here and probably have, maybe a little bit of a different perspective on how we are. But we've lost some of those civic engagement. There are so fewer true candidate forums, so fewer opportunities for voters to just participate in a civic dialogue with two people that want what's best for Wisconsin, that they might have different ways of getting there. So what can the parties do? I think I don't have a great answer for that, but I think that maybe we can, sometimes take it down a notch. And we were visiting over here. When I was in office, I would go at the county fair. I would go and visit the Dem tent in Rock County or in Walworth County because I knew those folks. They were local elected officials. I was still on their ballot, and some of them were on mine. But as as a statewide candidate, I was always gracious when I would cross paths with other candidates, but I didn't interact with with my opponent. But the civility, I think, is missing. So I don't. To be honest, I think understanding that everyone's legislative district or everyone's county might be a little bit different, because when you're a Dane County Republican Party, you're going to be a little bit different than a Walworth County Republican Party. And I think that we do, as the party, understand that everyone is going to have a little bit of a different message. But I don't know how to necessarily fix what you're talking about.
So Ben, do the political parties, they're partisan organizations, do they have a role in nurturing bipartisanship?
I think the parties do. And I think the way that works is giving elected officials and lawmakers space and support to be able to reach across party lines. I'm proud of the way that the governor's engaged in the budget negotiations that are happening now. We had a really frustrating situation.
That were happening.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The governor has been working especially on childcare, on public school funding, and on the university system as his priorities, and open to compromise. Yesterday, the Republican lawmakers left the bargaining table and walked away, and I hope they come back, because to me, that art of compromise, of finding common ground, and no one gets everything they want, but everyone gets something they want. That's the art of lawmaking and the art of governing. And in the Democratic Party, people recognize that the governor wasn't going to walk away with everything on his wish list, but there was support for him having those conversations. There have been moments when the Republican Party has done that in recent years. On the shared revenue bill, for example, that was a real breakthrough that I think left our state better off and allowed every local government in our state to not have to lay off police and firefighters and shutters public buildings. But there have been other moments when a faction of the GOP has basically pulled back folks from negotiating tables that would have allowed those kinds of compromises to go forward. And I feel like we're in that kind of moment right now with the budget. We had a moment like that that I remember vividly when there was legislation after January 6th to say that we should tweak the dates where we count electoral college votes to prevent any future moment where someone tries to sabotage an election and overturn the election result. And that went through the state Senate, and it was going through the state Assembly, and then Donald Trump put out a press release and called on Republicans to oppose it, and there was a battle within the Republican caucus, and suddenly it didn't come up for a vote. And so Wisconsin's the only state in the country that didn't pass the post-January 6th legislation to protect democracy. And that to me, I think, is a dangerous trend when it feels like there's so much kind of heated partisanship that people can't do things that the vast majority of people in both parties agree should happen. And I hope that where we go, my hope is that with the maps we have now that mean that more elected officials are in competitive districts, there's a greater incentive for people on both sides to look for common ground and be able to actually focus on getting things done for people, because that's what Wisconsinites need.
Okay, so let's squeeze in some more questions here. Yeah, go ahead over here, sir. So the question is, the Democrats work the angles on fundraising. So what's wrong with Republicans? They haven't taken it up on.
Well, again, we do compare. We try to compare ourselves to what the Republican Party, to what the Democratic Party is doing and doing well, but we don't always know. But certainly, you can see some of the outside groups and the spending was higher on the liberal side in both races, although relatively similar amount of spending. So I think there are other there are other things that the commission can potentially look at as far as, how are our allied organizations, are we all rowing in the same direction without coordinating? Or we've talked. I know there's even some new legal guidance out on that, and so that's something that's on our radar. Are there things that we can do better? Are there things areas where we are duplicating, where perhaps we know we can scale back so we can focus on the other on other priorities?
Okay, go ahead right here. So what are you doing to encourage more women to run? Go ahead, Ben.
So on the Democratic side, there are groups like Emerge that are focused specifically on recruiting and supporting and training women candidates to run for office. There are groups like Emily's List that endorse pro-choice women for office and support them in primaries and in general elections. And in our state party, and I think both parties, the majority of the active members are women. The majority of, in the Democratic Party, I believe the majority of our county chairs are women. The majority of our state legislators are women. And we've had extraordinary candidates. We supported, we now have a all-women kind of pro-democracy majority on the state Supreme Court that we've enthusiastically supported. What we find is, and there's a lot of studies of this, that women candidates often do better as candidates, but feel less likely to think of themselves as the person who should run. And so they have to be asked more times by people and said, no, we want you to run. And so often women are doing the work when, guys, and I'm a guy myself, are out in front of the scenes. So really supporting extraordinary women candidates to put their name on the ballot, making sure they have support and backup, that they have networks of peers to be able to support them as they go through that work, can then help to find great nominees for all kinds of different offices. And I think there's a significant chance, for example, that the ranks of women members of Congress from Wisconsin grows in 2026 because of the amazing folks that step forward and do that kind of work.
Okay, Amy?
Sure, and I'm going to take an interesting little perspective on this, but it's disappointing when I look back at the consequences of the redistricted Assembly and Senate maps, because some really good Republican women lost their seats. Senator Ballweg served honorably for a number of years in the Assembly and the Senate. Alan Schutt, who was my predecessor, was paired with another member. Amy, Representative Binsfield, redistricted into a tough seat, and Angie Sappick as well, Representative Sappick. So 3 rising stars in Republican politics, 3 younger women that basically just got boxed out of their short-term election prospects, re-election prospects. Hopefully not long-term. And in the case of Senator Ballweg, certainly she had a longer career, but that's pretty disappointing. And when you're trying to build bridges and build majorities, and you have women who got redistricted out of their seats by a court and a governor that just wanted to tip the scales in their favor, that gives me a little bit of a reason to be just disappointed, because I was excited for those ladies. But as far as candidates and candidate performance, I think for someone like Brittany, first-time candidate who hadn't run before, and as a female, someone who reached out to her to just say, hey, can I help you collect some nomination papers, and then ended up managing her campaign. But like you said, there's a lot of, there's just that, I think when you find someone who's willing to do the work and the team that they build around them, I think that you can really move mountains when women work together. But as far as may the best candidate win, certainly, but I don't want women to be afraid to run. And like those 3 women, they just got elected to their seats. They just did all this work, and that was taken away from them. So I think that's kind of disappointing.
Okay, question here. Where's the space for moderates in the parties? They probably won't be at the conventions.
There'll be a bunch at the Democratic Party.
Okay, go ahead.
The Democratic Party is a Big Tent party, and that's the only way we win, especially in a state like Wisconsin. The Democratic Party has hardcore progressives, and it has moderates, and even some now disaffected Republicans. If you look at the polls of Wisconsinites, there's a larger number of people who say I'm a conservative than there are people who say I'm a liberal. but there's a big chunk of people who say they're moderates. So for Democrats to win, we need to be a party that liberal voters support and find themselves in, and a party that moderate voters support and find themselves in. We really only win when we have a majority of moderates and the overwhelming majority of liberal voters. And some conservatives who feel like the Trump administration is trying to melt down the Constitution, even if they disagree with Democrats, now are finding some reason to support Democratic candidates for office. And that means that I think as a party, we have to make clear that not everyone has to agree on everything, and that we do see value in bipartisan compromise and actually getting things done, even where folks might have intense disagreements, they can find common ground on other things. I think that's the kind of party that both can win and deserves to win, because we have to represent a state where people have a huge variety of political views. And I really do believe that 80% of things most people basically agree on. The fight is always about the things that people disagree on, because that's where the conflict is. And at the end of the day, there's a contrast that you have to draw. But to me, that there's a danger is if you think that those are the only things that matter. I think all of us care about our kids being able to learn and thrive and feel safe in their communities. That's stuff that should unite us all. We all care about having an economy that works for working folks, where people can pursue their dreams and get ahead. And those are things that most of the things that need to happen to make that possible are actually not sources of disagreement. So my hope is that we keep building a party on the Democratic side that can win big, enduring majorities in our state and deserve to win those majorities, and then use those majorities to deliver the kind of change that benefits everybody.
So, Amy, where's the room for moderates in your party?
I think that the Republican Party of Wisconsin is also a big tent party, and recognizing that there's more that unites us than that divides us. And what Ben brought up on education issues, for example, and I know that's something that's very important to you, Kaleem. And running the campaign for someone in a nonpartisan race, someone who was kind of didn't have a political home. Brian Schimming had a great Facebook and tweet after inviting Brittany Kinzer to our convention. And she is not a Republican, and she went to the RNC, she went to the DNC, but she's an independent, was an unaffiliated voter, but came to our convention to thank the Republican grassroots for supporting her. And she thanks all the independents and Democrats who supported her as well. But that's one example of, I think, finding candidates that also have cross appeal and people who are willing to accept that certain things like education shouldn't, maybe they are on a nonpartisan ballot, but it turns into a partisan ballot anyway. But local elections are becoming something that conservative and liberal candidates are kind of looking to their parties to support. And I think sometimes for the Republican Party, we want to, I think, allowing candidates to be authentic, because they don't necessarily have to be a card-carrying candidate to be someone that you're going to go out and do doors for in a school board race. But if they align with your values, more and more, I think that the Republican Party is saying, that's okay because that's normal. And it's not like we were saying it wasn't okay before, but it's saying this is important. All of these elections matter. That's why there's a farm team and a whole lot of other candidate coaching, because people in local government, I was first elected to my town board. No one asked me what my affiliation was, but more and more, I think that as candidates step up and run for these seats, and then the parties look and see how they can help. I think being accepting of people who are just saying, I believe in lower taxes, or I believe in making sure that kids can read, like allowing them to have their own platform, but still helping them out. Does that make? For me, I think welcoming, not just if they're not necessarily even in your party, but welcoming them as candidates at all levels, so that we get the best possible people in office.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the last question because we've run over time here. But so Ben Wikler, what's next for Ben Wikler?
I have been chaperoning my kids' field trips.
Okay,
something that I did not do for very long time.
Are you packing the
chair.
Lunch though?
I've been packed lunches. There have been camping trips. My 7-year-old is playing a blowfish in his school play at the moment, and I got to go to opening day. And I'm working on a book proposal because I think there's a lot to learn from. In Wisconsin, I think we had a preview of what's happening nationally. This is a state where we went from a blue trifecta to a red trifecta in 2010, and the Republican administration sought to change the rules and smashed unions and gerrymandered legislative districts and changed voting rules and all these different things. And it's taken years to fight back and organize and build at every level of government to get to the point now where we are truly a purple state. We were a state that looked red just a few years ago. And I think across the country now, if you look at how federal power is wielded, it looks like a red country, even though the public is still purple in the United States and supports a lot of policies that Democrats really believe in. So I want to try to tell the story of what we've done here and how it's made a difference. And my hope is that both our state can finish going all the way to where I think most Wisconsinites at this point would like it to go, and also support folks across the country who want to do the same thing.
All right, when you're on your book tour, you know you got a spot here. All right, so let's hear it for Ben Wikler and Amy Loudenbeck.
As the state's leading property and casualty insurance trade association, the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance plays a crucial role in safeguarding Wisconsinites. Alliance members provide vital insurance coverage, ensuring financial protection for individuals, businesses, and communities across the state. In times of need, they act as a reliable resource, helping residents recover from unforeseen events. Ultimately, the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance and its members contribute to the resilience and well-being of Wisconsin families and businesses by offering essential protection and support. You have been watching a production of Wisconsin Eye, your unfiltered window into legislative deliberations and public policy programming, where our mission is to provide Wisconsinites an opportunity to access the legislative process and connect with conversations that inform our citizenry. Please consider supporting our mission, and thank you for watching. Wisconsin Eye, policy made public.